Seconded. And I call the member for Wentworth.
Thank you very much. I'd like to second the motion. Deputy Speaker, in January this year we marked 77 years since the liberation of Auschwitz, and we remembered those who suffered at the hands of Hitler's Nazi regime, including 6 million Jewish victims and millions of other victims, including those from the LGBTQI community, Roma, Sinti, people with disabilities, political dissidents and more. Today, as we are seeing a worrying number of anti-Semitic incidents reported in our schools and our universities, the work of the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance and other organisations in promoting Holocaust remembrance, combating anti-Semitism and combating Holocaust denialism has never been more important. On behalf of my community in Wentworth, I'm therefore very honoured to co-sponsor this motion along with the Honourable Member for McNamara, and want to also acknowledge the work that my predecessor, the former member for Wentworth, Dave Sharma, did in this work. Wentworth is home to a large and vibrant Jewish community. I have lived there almost my whole life, and over the years I've developed deep personal connections to many families that were devastated by the Holocaust, and many who sadly continue to suffer anti-Semitism today. When I was 20 years old, I had the privilege of visiting Auschwitz with my father. I'll never forget that experience. You walk into the gates, and you can't quite believe what has happened there actually happened there. Then you see the piles of clothes, the bags, the belongings of people who died there, and the enormity of what has happened starts to sink in, the incomprehensibility of the unimaginable. Earlier this year, I sat in Rickwood Cemetery with members of the Wentworth community, where they read the names of family members who died in the Holocaust. And that was another moment where I really felt the enormity of what has happened. It is hard to imagine those horrors of the Holocaust unless you have those experiences that truly educate you about them. Studying the Holocaust, be that in school, visiting Auschwitz, or in the local Jewish museum, gives people a crucial understanding of how social, religious, political, and economic factors can erode and ultimately destroy human rights. It helps us to understand and appreciate the vital importance of our own democratic institutions and their vulnerabilities. And these lessons must never be forgotten. And that is why some of the trends in the Gandalf Foundation's recent study, which is so important, are worrying. Nearly a quarter of Australian adults admit to having little or no knowledge of the Holocaust. That number rises to 1 in 3 for millennials. The knowledge of Australians about their own Australian links to or stories related to the Holocaust is very low. And the research also found apparent latent anti-Semitism in Australia. Some of the trends noted in the Gandalf survey are unfortunately evident in the worrying rise of anti-Semitism across our society. As I highlighted earlier today, in the past 2 weeks, the New South Wales Board of Deputies, a group that I work with, have received reports of 2 cases of anti-Semitic bullying in Sydney's east. These incidents come fresh off the back of another school in New South Wales where students use a chat room to share racist, homophobic and violent misogynistic content. And earlier this year, we saw another case in Sydney where the word Hitler was graffitied across a high school fence. All members of our community need to feel safe and to be able to practice their faith in freedom. We need urgent action to educate people about the Holocaust and to fight the rising tide of anti-Semitism. Whilst the Gandalf survey found some worrying gaps in knowledge about the Holocaust, it also highlighted the brilliant work of the Holocaust museums. In those who replied to the survey, those who visited the museum are about 50% more likely to have excellent Holocaust knowledge than those who haven't. I have had the honour of visiting the Sydney Jewish Museum, and I support the work of the IRA museums across the country. I understand that there will be new or redeveloped museums in every state and territory, and I support those development of resources that could share with communities and schools. Holocaust education in our schools is critical. I also call on all states and territories to follow the lead of Victoria and New South Wales and make Holocaust education a mandatory aspect of their school curriculum. We also need meaningful implementation of the IRA anti-Semitism definition in our universities. There are still too many anti-Semitic motions passed by student bodies across the country, and universities are not always safe spaces for our Jewish students as they should be. I want to see leaders and community members empowered to speak out and take actions against incidents when they happen, and I stand ready to support them in their efforts. I commend this motion to the House.
I thank the